I'm very happy to see you here again with us. Today we will talk about a very, very important and relevant topic, which is, are all the claims related to environment proved? Is there evidence? Is there a mean to make them evident? As usual, it's not FAO who will talk about this. We will, in a few seconds, have the usual opening remarks from Iride Ceccaci from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and we will have immediately afterwards our panelists speaking today: Michael Martin from the Swedish Environmental Research Institute, Matti Rupisalis from an environmental life cycle assessment specialist from the 2.0 LCA consultants, and we will have Henry Hurst and our longtime friend Ramin from the Henry from the Control Union and Ramin from the Association of Vertical Farming. And with no further delays, let me give the floor to Iride for the usual opening remarks. Thank you very much. Iride, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jacopo. It's very nice to see you all again on this platform. This is our 9th e-dialogue. Well, Jacopo already said it, but it's about environmental sustainability assessments of commercial urban farming, and it is the last event of 2023. Since it is the last one, I just wanted to give you a few numbers of the previous 8 ones. So apparently we are quite popular as a group. We have had 800 attendees in these e-dialogues, and our YouTube channel has been viewed more than 1,200 people actually followed us on YouTube, and the LinkedIn post had more than 7,000 views. So I think that we need to remain connected even though the year is finishing, because we are quite a large community already. So today is a very important session because we are discussing the core of our regional program, which is the sustainability assessment of urban farming investments. And this has been implemented together with the ongoing cross-regional urban farming review. And it was packaged under a response that wanted to really tackle COVID. But of course, this goes very much beyond, this particular point in time, and we've seen trends that are very important for this sector and for urban farming. So the bank is engaged in this sector through this project and these 2 technical cooperation packages with the FAO, but we didn't invest in the sector yet. So we hope that maybe next year we can move to the next level. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you for being with us next year as well, and to remain connected after this last seminar of 2023. Thank you very much all, and let's listen to the experts now.
Many thanks, Iride, as usual, for your kind words. Let me move straight forward to our panelists. Michael, Marti, the floor is yours. Over.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay, great. So my name is Michael Martin, as Jacopo mentioned, and I'm presenting on behalf of my colleagues here in a study on the state-of-the-art of the environmental footprint of urban farming systems. So this is a work in progress that we're doing, and we'll show you some preliminary results here. The background of this is that we often hear about the sustainability of urban farming systems, and it's generally quite positive that they focus a lot on sustainability and that they can be self-sufficient, reduce transport, improve yields, be pesticide-free, and there's a lot related to, for example, their location in urban environments, so they can shorten supply chain and maybe reduce carbon footprints and be more resource efficient. But these are often not usually quantified, so we don't have that much data to back that up, and it often leads to criticism of the systems. So one thing that we can do to address many of these topics on sustainability is include life cycle assessments, or LCAs, of these. And it's a standard procedure to assess the environmental performance of these systems. So you can, for example, review a product or a process, and you can review everything from cradle to gate or cradle to grave. We usually do this in 4 steps. So there's a goal and scope, then we collect data, and then we do an assessment, and then we interpret. And all of this is based on ISO standards. And in the end, we get more than just, for example, carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. When doing an LCA, we have a lot of different environmental impact categories that we can get out. So when we did the actual study, we did a scientific literature review, and we tried to find literature on urban agriculture with a life cycle perspective, and then that applied quantitative sustainability assessments for commercial or case studies. And we weaved out quite a few of them through this, and we took away a lot of studies that were only theoretical examples. As you can see, then we found a lot of studies more in recent years because it's becoming increasingly popular. So in the last 2 years, there's been a lot of studies. And these have generally identified, for example, rooftop greenhouses, vertical farms, and greenhouses in or near urban environments. But we've also found studies related to, for example, aquaponic systems, open air like field trials and raised beds on rooftops, but also mushroom production, and even like other types of hydro and aeroponic beds and different growing systems. The largest share of these are very much related to, for example, tomatoes and lettuce production. But it's increasingly popular that we see these, for example, herbs, mushrooms, microgreens, even strawberries, but even totally different types of crops like fodder production and biostimulants. And of course, also fish with the aquaponic systems. When we started to collect the data and try to put it together, what we found is that there's a large span of results for the different systems. And here you see a table that'll be in the final chapter, where we look at the impacts or the greenhouse gas impacts for the different types of systems and the different types of products that they produce. And what we see is that again, there's a large span of these, and it's primarily due to some outliers, but generally the numbers are quite probably just in the middle of those, which is more reasonable. We also see that there's a mix of experimental, theoretical, and real cases, which leads also to this this span of study or impacts. And these, what we found is that they're very context dependent. So for example, in vertical farms, it can make a huge difference if you're in the Northern Europe or in a place where the energy system is not as clean. What we did find is that the hotspots are, for example, for vertical farms, the energy and infrastructure; for greenhouses, infrastructure, inputs and energy; and aquaponics, the energy and the feed. We also found that there's a lot of other impacts that are available. So salient impacts include, for example, acidification, eutrophication, toxicity, and cumulative energy demand. But a lot of the studies use different LCIA methods, and these have varying units, so it's hard to compare them sometimes. There's also a large mix of availability in the text or in, for example, the appendices, where we can get this information. So we stress the need for more thorough and transparent LCI sheets. But we can also extract some information, and we've done some studies on for example, the KPIs, such as the water use and the yield in different in energy demand for the different systems. And in conclusion, it's an emerging field or subject to research, so we see it that the number of studies are constantly increasing. But it should be emphasized that it's context dependent, so you can't generalize that vertical farms are the same everywhere or greenhouses everywhere. And we need more validation of the claims and to support these. We need support the validation of the claims. So we'll need a lot more studies to make, for example, comparative assertions. And the case studies is one thing that we try to do also in this project. And there I'll leave the floor to my colleague Marty to provide some input.
Thanks for the overview, Michael. Share my screen. Yes, Thanks for the introduction, Michael. My name is Martí, as Jacopo anticipated. I'm going to present a comparative assessment of environmental performances of urban farming systems. So actual LCA case studies that we performed from a selection of different farming systems across Europe. For these case studies to be considered in this analysis, we draft some basic requirements. The first one is in terms of data quality, which is, as Michael was anticipating, vital for life cycle assessment. If we can get hold of good data, then the outcomes of the study won't be really good, will have high uncertainty, and won't probably be comparable to others. Then also that these case studies had different specific features in terms of artificial lighting, in terms of recirculation systems, in terms of soilless versus soil. So mainly technological differences to cover as much diversity as possible in terms of different urban farming systems. Also that these case studies that we included had the perspective to become in the future, or that are already a commercial activity, since this is the main focus of this study. And then that they produced two types of greens, either basil or lettuce, to keep the studies comparable between them. Then we ended up with a final sample of 6 case studies from 3 European countries that we analyzed individually and using the same impact methods and same impact categories to be compared. In terms of environmental modeling and inventory, we chose an attributional LCA. For the people that is familiar with LCA, there are 2 main modeling approaches, attributional and consequential. In terms of functional unit, we use what is the most common one, which one is 1 kilogram of fresh weight of product at the production site gate. And in terms of inventory organization, which means that when we collect all the data, how we organize that for it to be clear in those LCA sheets that Michael was mentioning. So we divided the farms between operation and infrastructure subsystems based on the lifespan of the materials. And then we divided these two in different items, like, for example, the growing medium, which could be like perlite, coir, soil, the different type of fertilizers, either inorganic or organic, water, depending on the sources, like tap water. It could be rainwater if the system is really efficient in terms of rainwater collection system, or other, like, for example, electricity from LEDs in the case of vertical farming. In terms of infrastructure, we had the greenhouse or the vertical farming structure. Let's say some examples of materials could be steel, concrete, but there are like a lot of others. The auxiliary equipment, which could be like the stake trays or other processes like the transport to waste streamer or the waste streamer itself. Now, just to jump directly to the results, I'm going to present a couple of our case studies, since that's the time that we have for this presentation. The first one is multi-stack high-tech vertical farming. You can imagine something similar to the picture that you have on your right, where we are able to grow greens at different levels, so putting one above the other. So this configuration also saves a lot of vertical space and allow us to increase yields. And in the center, you can already see like the environmental profile of this case study in terms of climate change. Please don't look at the whole graph. I'm going to just point you out on the most relevant hotspot that we identified. And as Michael was mentioning earlier, for this kind of vertical farming systems, a great contribution comes from the energy or the electricity consumed, mainly from artificial lighting for LEDs, for example, or for HVAC, which stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And here we could already see this direct cause effect, in which if we have like more artificial lighting and HVAC, we will in turn have more energy consumption. If the case that in that country the electricity mix is dominated by fossil fuels, we will have more climate change impacts. The second example is a rooftop greenhouse, the picture on your right. You can imagine that this the crops are grown on the rooftop, but below that we have a couple or 3 or 4 levels where people actually live or people that is working. But on the rooftop, we have a greenhouse implemented that is able to provide fresh food to the people that live or work there. In that case, we saw that, and also aligned with Michael findings, that one of the biggest contributions was coming from the greenhouse or vertical farming infrastructure. And the reason behind that is that because we were growing lettuce in that case study, and the distance between what would be the head of the lettuce and the ceiling of the greenhouse was pretty huge, so a couple or 3 meters. So in terms of vertical space, the system was really inefficient. So some mitigation strategies that could be already in place here is to imply a multi-stack agriculture or grow different type of crops that occupy this space more efficiently. Just to wrap up in terms of conclusions, the first one is that when it comes to environmental performance, some features that I was saying, artificial lighting, heating, soil systems, are linked to specific contributions. This allows us to, when assessing a specific case study, if we already see that it has like artificial lighting, we can already forecast that it will have a high energy consumption and in turn high climate impacts in terms of in relative terms. Sorry. But we also stress that a specific LCA study is recommended to avoid jumping to wrong conclusions. Secondly, to design the system based on its aim. If the case of our report, all of them were commercial, so the main goal would be to maximize yield. So implementing different type of technologies that allows us to propose this goal are of course in line of EA. But on the other hand, if our plan is to implement a urban farming system in a neighborhood to increase like the feeling of belonging of the neighborhood, to increase the social cohesion, maybe the yield would be in a secondary role, and the main purpose would be more to provide these positive social impacts. And just to end, also to stress out, as Michael was saying, the need for this standardization and certification schemes to increase comparability. We were able to compare 6 different LCA case studies because we were the ones that were doing them. But if we were to compare these case studies with published literature, we'd already find some problems in terms of the disparity of impact methods, of impact categories, or other parameters that would provide uncertainty. That's all from my side. Thanks for listening. Back to you, Jacopo.
Thank you very much, Michael. Martí, thank you very much. Martí, since there is a very well pointed out question here, if you could just clarify what is the, the CO2 usage for 1 kilogram of produce. Is that what you were showing in your slide? This is the question from Marina. So if you could just prepare your answer, then we will answer later on. So if you can just go through the chat and check on the questions we already have. So the topic of understanding how to measure, what to measure, where to look for the data, it's again very, very important. With no further delay, let me give the floor to first Ramin Ebrahim-Nejad from the Association for Vertical Farming, and then immediately after to Henry Ernst for initiating the discussion on certifications, labels, and so forth and so on. Ramin, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you a lot to the organizers and everyone present here. Let me share my screen. I will give a very short and fast intro to the association and also to the certification program that we are working on with Control Union. And also afterwards, Henry will go into the details of the certification. Our mission is basically to create the unified front for the industry and try to raise awareness about the different developments inside the industry. And we are a member-based association from upstream technology providers, the vertical farm operators, and also downstream relevant related industries that see value in development of indoor farming over the world. Our strategy is based on communication and outreach, basically raising awareness about these developments, education and research support, so collaboration with universities, and most importantly, in relation to this webinar, standards and certifications, so that the consumer can see the difference in the product, and also we can set trends for the sustainability of the industry as a whole. Just a very brief intro on the process of getting the sustainable indoor farming certification established. In 2020, we had the partnership initiated with Control Union UK branch, and during the 2021, we had multiple different scoping workshops to create the criteria for the standard certification. And also start of 2022, we had the feedback meeting so that we can polish different criteria and see the feedback from the operators of farms. There were multiple stakeholders from Asia, Europe, and North America so that we can have a general overview of different geographies with different situations. Feel free to get in touch with me, and hopefully we can get your feedback from this webinar as well. Henry, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ramin. So I only have one slide to present here, but it's quite a busy one. So hopefully I'll be able to provide you with a quick overview of what the program is, and we can use that as a starting point for this dialogue. So as Ramin mentioned, the program has been created in collaboration with the AVF. As it currently stands, the program is now under the ownership of the Association for Vertical Farming. Control Union UK, the company I represent, is now the auditing and inspections body for this program. So essentially we have a governance structure where there's a program owner, which is distinct from the auditor. It's quite common practice, quite good practice for certification schemes in general. The standard criteria are up there on your screen. I'm happy to go through these and discuss these with you. I think echoing kind of what Martí mentioned is we wanted to establish a standardized way of measuring impact and a standardized way of collecting data, because while we would like to have taken a quantitative approach from day one, there just don't happen to be globalized databases out there allowing that to be possible. We hope to, in time, set these benchmarks, but again, the plasticity in the industry, as demonstrated by Martí and in his presentation ahead, with all the different types of production, all the geographical differences, make the creation of these benchmarks really difficult without a very extensive data set. Extensive not only across different operations, but also in time. And this is one of the key pillars of the certification program, is continuous improvement and tracking improvements over time. Because if we're not able to set benchmarks, then how do we decide what sustainability is within a field? Well, we've taken the approach of currently storing consistent data collection and some degree of transparency in how that data is communicated to the inspection body. We fear that this might be a bit of a challenge given the current hesitancy to share a lot of this data. But hopefully by creating this independent framework, there will be a little bit more openness in that we can make information privacy guarantees, and we can ensure data protection and the upholding of anonymity, which will hopefully once allow us to build out these databases which are required to create these strong benchmarks and standards for sustainability, but also get a better snapshot of where the industry is today and the direction that it's going in over time. So there's a couple of the benefits listed out there for you. These are quite common benefits for certification schemes in general, but with the added one being here for vertical farming is that we can cut through a little bit of these claims which don't necessarily have enough substantiation at this point. We hope by this certification program to provide that substantiation. Now, we're looking at data collection, we're looking at improvement plans, we're looking at responsible use across all of these different impact categories that we have here. Those are the standard criteria on the bottom left. We hope to implement this. We're mindful of the field that we're working in. Vertical farming is quite nascent, compared to other forms of agriculture, which have been around for a couple thousand years. Vertical farming is very much still in its infancy, and we note that a lot of the companies that are out there are particularly in Europe with the energy crisis right now, their priorities are economic survival. So the way we've designed the certification process is a two-stage way. First, with a desk-based review of all the information and documentation which can be gathered remotely. And that will provide a snapshot of where the producer might stand against the standard. Now, this part of the assessment is completely confidential between the assessment body and the grower or the production site. And if it seems as though certification is unreachable, then the assessment can be halted there without the need for further investment or further plunging fees into essentially an assessment which will not result in certification. So hopefully we've put in place certain elements which will not only make the certification process more robust, with a two-part certification system being very common. I can never remember the exact ISO numbers, but we know that we require the auditors to carry ISO 9001, so for quality management audits, and then 17065 might be off the top of my head. I'll look for it and put it in the chat as we go on. But essentially, we hope to provide a robust framework under which this data that Marti and company are seeking, this data can be collected so that we can then set further, more robust benchmarks for the future and continue to substantiate or begin to substantiate any claims moving forward as well in the industry. Because it's true that a lot is said about the sustainability and potential of vertical farms. We hope to be able, through this program, to start demonstrating this. I am happy to go on for more, but I feel like this is perhaps a good point for us to open up the dialogue, Jacopo.
That's correct, Henry. Thank you so much. If you could, if you can unshare, then we go back to our discussion.
Sure.
A lot of very interesting points raised by all the panelists. I see there are already a number of questions in the chat, but let me first point out two things. The first one is what also was mentioned by the large majority of the investors that participated our last e-dialogue is clarity and transparency. Do not think that claims will make you shine better across the sector, because a lot of the banks are now more and more sensitive to environmental and social safeguards and claims, and they will need evidence of what you're saying. Another thing that is very often neglected, most of the investment and finance sector is moving towards Paris alignment. That means that sooner they will want to have clarity. And again, if you look at the latest EU decisions that of course are not related to our specific field of operation now, but we see that both the private sector and the public sector are really moving into a much greater and deeper level of transparency and clearance of all the greenwashing and over statement regarding environment and climate. We have a new sector, of course, new sector, new rules, but let's remember that we know what to do, we know what to look at. So we just need more data, more transparency in the data. Last point, again, from the previous e-dialogues, the entire, for the entire 9th e-dialogue, we had the same mantra, share data. If the more we keep data secret and shared, and the less the banking and investment center will be interested. So we really need to be open and to engage, because otherwise we will not reach our targets. Now, I see we have a number of questions. The more technical one I see that have been answered by Marti directly in the chat. If that is not the case, please just raise your hand and we will go back to it. Thomas also asked how much market share do vertical farms have today. Very briefly, so far we have a market, sorry, not a market, but we have a sector that is valued around $5 to $6 billion, and it aims to reach 10, but it's forecasted to reach $10 billion in the next 5-6 years. We have, let me see what we have. Okay, if Michael or Marti, if you could describe what you mean, or Henry, whoever wants to have take the floor here, responsible energy use. I think focusing on energy is also a very interesting point, and then we will give the floor to the other colleagues that are raising hands or asking questions in the chat. Henry,
I think that might be a question for Ramin and I, as it kind of relates to the program. Ramin, do you want to take this, or shall I?
Go ahead.
I can just say briefly, we have to go into that direction of renewable resources, and I think this energy crisis that we are dealing with is going to be a metamorphosis point for vertical farming, so that we all know that if the energy source is renewable and it's not fossil fuel based, then the LCA studies would all go to the better image and also reflect the environmental sustainability of farms. But Henry, please do share more info.
Sure. So within the context of our program, responsible energy use at this stage is very much kind of a, I wouldn't say high level, but we're very much at step one, right? It's worth bearing in mind that this program that we've developed is the first in its lineage, so it's the first iteration, and at the time being, responsible energy use revolves around so not only the tracking of energy efficiency, but also having management plans in place, which follow timely, actionable, and measurable improvements in energy use efficiency. So this is what we mean by responsible energy use. It's more not only, as Ramin mentioned, the shift towards renewables, but while that's not possible, having remedial actions in place to mitigate as much as possible the use of energy in farming operations. That's kind of a high level definition. I also see that there's a question as to whether or not the CIF standards are available online. They are. We can provide a link to that, and you can find further details on each of these categories, and yeah, read them at your own time. Obviously, Ramin put my email and his up earlier. I'll put mine in the chat. So if you have any questions or any further conversation is needed, then you can reach out to me.
Thank you very much, Henry. Thank you, Ramin. I think before I give the floor to Diego and to Paul, we also have a number of questions that I will merge and refers to the non-environmental sides of sustainability, and rightfully we have questions that relates also to the social sustainability, and I think our colleagues wonders if certifications like yours will also include the sustainability from a more anthropocentric approach and kind of social approach. And
Ramin, if we had $1 for every time we were asked that question, huh? There is absolutely plans to include social dimensions into the program in the future. We figured that a starting point on focusing on a relatively small subset of the factors, obviously ESG is present in everyone's mind. We thought that because this is really our first stab at this industry, at certification within this field, that a focus on environmental would be a starting point, later opening up to wider social issues, absolutely. But that's certainly within our plans.
Excellent, thank you very much. Let me give the floor to Alicia that posted the question a long time ago, and then we go to Diego and Paul. Alicia, please, the floor. If you wish to take the floor, please do so.
Hi there. I'm a vertical farmer and equipment manufacturer, and we're from Canada. And organic certification has gone a long way for increasing the profitability of the produce sold. So I was wondering if this is going to do something similar, like guaranteeing the cleanliness, since we're vertically farming and completely enclosed. We're not using pesticides, no sprays or anything like that. So I'm just wondering if this will be able to be used from a marketing standpoint directly to consumers to help them kind of understand more about vertical farming and the benefits, so we can mark up our costs a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. We absolutely do have a criteria in the program, in the standard, which says that plant protection products cannot be applied directly to the plant or to the vegetal part of the plant. So that is absolutely considered in the scheme. As Ramin mentioned, there were months and months of stakeholder workshops, and this is an issue that came up time and time again. So we absolutely made sure to include it, though it's not necessarily directly related to environmental sustainability. This is more of a quality aspect. It did make its way into the program.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Henry. Very, very important point, because what we see from our analysis is that the large majority of companies claims 0 pesticides, 0 fertilizers, 0 everything, and we really again need to be consistent with the claims that we published. Diego, please, the floor is yours. Then we have Paul, and then we have Kindle.
Right. So my question was more about the macro scale of this. So my understanding is that
Can you
policy.
introduce yourself? Sorry, because we don't see
Yeah.
you. We don't. Sorry, apologies.
Sure. Diego McCall, PhD student at ICTA. And so I was curious about the macro implications of this. So I understand that you're trying to build policies that cover more or less large swaths of territory, but every single presenter in some shape or form said that, well, it's context dependent. And I'm just curious how, if you enact a policy, you're going to create, no matter what happens, you're going to create winners and losers. And depending on the environmental impact specific to the region, these policies would also create people that will have to do more things to be environmentally sustainable, and in other regions, less. So in the north, if you have a greenhouse, you're going to use more energy, of course. If you're in the south part of Europe, you're going to use less energy just because of regional differences, environmental differences. My curiosity is this really feasible? Is this really the way to go to try to build macro policies? And I was just curious to get the thoughts of the panelists on that.
That's a fantastic question. Do you mind if I go first? I've been talking a lot. Maybe someone
let
else should go
let
first.
me see if Michael and Martí has. I mean, let me go, because otherwise it's kind of a monodialogue. But I will give you the floor in a second. Michael, Martí, if you can also provide your thoughts. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I'm a researcher, so I'm a bit objective here, and I'm not trying to create a policy or a standard or anything. But what I think is that definitely I think that everything is context dependent, and that should be benchmarked based on that. But also we see, for example, that we're trying to so what I wrote at the end is comparative assertions. So we see comparative assertions with products that are generally replaced by, for example, vertical farms or greenhouses. And those need to be taken in mind, because, for example, in Sweden, the products that we buy from vertical farms or greenhouses are generally replacing other products from greenhouses and not necessarily open field. So we need to think about that as well.
Martí?
Nothing to add from my side, just that the context was the question was really pertinent. As we can see as we could see in the case studies, we had three different countries, and just by looking at the profile, just for one case study for being in the north of Europe and one case study being in the south of Europe, the environmental profile was completely different. So of course, comparing both of them is something that we should do, because I mean, at the moment of that the study, I was a researcher, but of course we should compare it context dependent. I completely agree with Michael at this point. Yeah.
Yes, and thank you, Martí. Before I give the floor to Henry, let me just bring my 2 cents. I think here a big game changer is not just the policy, but the policy environment and the context where we live, in terms of what is the country level of let's say of advancements in these regards. Of course, countries that have invested massively in renewable energies will have sectors that have a lower footprint in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Countries that have completely neglected renewables will have much higher. Now, to me, the importance is to create benchmarks, to have the data available, so to compare things, and then also to be able to address the policy with requests and directions. Henry, floor is yours.
I think you've asked a great question, Diego. And I think the fact of there being winners and losers is true for any type of certification. Particularly regarding sustainability. There's outfits, organizations who will just not be up to the standard, and in that case, I suppose they would lose out on the certification, as you say. The approach that we have taken so far is to avoid saying something like X kilowatt hours per head of lettuce is sustainable, Y kilowatt is not sustainable, or X percentage of renewables must be used in the energy mix, or Y percent is not allowed. We've avoided this right now for the very reasons that you outline. The approach that we've taken right now lies in data collection and in continuous improvement being embedded within the operations of these farms. So no matter where you are in the world, you can strive for continuous improvement, you can implement continuous improvement. No matter where you are in the world, you can collect your data and measure it along the guidelines that we require. these are the goalposts that we have set as this stage 1. And once we see this program out in action, once we see what this program looks like in the wild and the type of information that comes up out of it, then we can take the next steps. But for the time being, I think that we've remained fairly unrestrictive with regard to who can access it and the conditions of access as well, with regard to geographic variability or the type of production through the different types that Michael and Marti have outlined earlier.
Thank you very much. I have Paul, then Kindal, and then Daniel. Paul, please.
Hi, hi everyone. I'm Paul Gaultier, Professor of Quality Cropping at University of Queensland. The question that I have is mainly related to the fact that it seems, so, you know, we have talked about green bashing, and it sounds like we have now a CEA bashing. That's what's going on. And I don't understand why do we need to evaluate greenhouse and CEA on a CO2 basis if we don't do that for traditional farming. And so to me, like what it sounds like is we are evaluating buildings and companies, when I do think that it will be way more valuable to do an LCA for tomatoes or for product base. What I mean by that is if you are in Sweden, it takes the example that we were given recently. If you are in Sweden and you want to have tomatoes in the middle of the winter, you will probably import them from somewhere in the world. These have a CO2 impact. If you in the US, we have a lot of we have a lot of blueberries. They come from Peru. These have a CO2 impact also. If you produce your blueberries locally, maybe in a vertical farm, yes, it will be more energy, but it will maybe save also on CO2. In Australia, we also import from South America, from other parts of the world. Same thing, we have transportation and all of that. So my question is that, are we taking that, are you, in your evaluation, your certification, are you taking that into account? And secondly, I think the second question that we need to think about is, and I think there have been some question about, you know, social aspects there, but are we also taking into account, you know, country sovereignty and the impact of, you know, not having food could have on social stability and war, you know, like, I mean, the cost of vertical farming could be very high in terms of energy, that's true, but if it can save you to go into war because your people are not starving, that's another impact. So I think there's a two aspect, like, are we taking into account the global aspect of CO2 by importing, and also the social aspect of stability for the countries?
Thank you very much, Paul. Michael, Marti, and then Henry on Paul's question, please.
I think I would leave it to Marti to talk a bit more about the LCAs, but typically LCAs take into account all of the life cycle. So if we compare the availability of a product for a consumer, then we would take into account, for example, transportation and different things to be able to say whether or not the transportation is a large impact of the system. So that's usually taken into account there. And Marti, maybe you have
Yeah, to add to Michael, I completely agree with the point raised by Paul, but this was not taken into account in this study. The goal for this case study was to compare the 6 different futures and like to identify which were the hotspots. But I completely agree that to determine whether if I eat a tomato right now for lunch, whether a tomato that I'm importing from somewhere else or a tomato that I grow in my own garden or I bought it from market have different variety of impacts, that's the analysis that should be made. But for that, like a screening report that we performed, that wasn't included. But of course, as Michael was pointing out, all the transportation, not only for the fresh product, but also for all the background materials was included in the report.
All right, Henry?
Sure. For the first question regarding kind of distance and proximity, I suppose, to the source of production, we do address this somewhat through the food miles criteria. So we do track from point of production to first point of sale, how far the food might travel, though we don't address the CO2 impact of this immediately, because it's not the most straightforward thing for an auditor to go and assess when really the scope of the assessment is the farm. And this is something that we've had to keep in mind, and also relates to your second point on the social element. It's very hard to audit the social impact of a farm on wider food security. It's worth remembering that in all these certifications requires an auditor, someone who knows the program and has the checklist in his hand to go on site, to go to the farm and to go through this list. And so certain elements like the wider impact of such production are very hard to encapsulate in a standard, especially when the scope is specific to one production facility. But no, with regard to the CO2 element, we're trying to find a way to address it directly. Considering food miles in as one of the key criteria is what we've settled on for the time being.
All right, thank you very much. Let me add one thing. I mean, like, it would be great to have one process that certifies or clarifies on everything, but unfortunately it's not possible. But I think Paul also raised a very important element that refers to how much this kind of production could affect other aspects that are not necessarily immediately related to production factor, like, you know, conflict over food and food security in general. I think there is no answer, Paul, to that directly, but there is more of a recommendation. Like, again, if we don't have strong data sets, if we don't start really having strong data collection processes and unbiased analysis of this new type of productions and new technologies, we will not have the answers to your question, because of course such a question would require like very strong baselines to analyze and to compare to trends and context data. But I can only echo what you mentioned. Let me give now the floor.
You're muted, Jacob.
Yeah, sorry, apologies. Let me give the floor to Kindal, then to Daniel, and then to Leone. Thank you.
Hi, yes, I'm Kendall. I'm a sustainability specialist for a vertical farming company. And I was just wondering, we talk all the time, this is a very common conversation in this type of space about how companies are really hesitant to release data. And then I did get one answer in the chat that said that people are afraid to be the first. But at this point, we've had quite a few impact reports and that sort of thing published, but it still doesn't seem to be like starting the trend that I was hoping for. Can any of you guys speak to why you think that is, or what can start getting companies to release that sort of data? Thank you.
Yeah, I could start, and I could say, so I work a lot with the vertical farms and sustainability assessments, and that's what I answered, that I think a lot of them don't want to be first. So we actually work with them a lot to improve sustainability, like actually how life cycle assessment should be used to improve the processes. And then the numbers is one thing about like communication. So they oftentimes don't want the numbers to be out there, but they actually work with life cycle thinking to improve their systems quite a lot. But what we see is that we don't really have like common methods to be able to compare or get the sustainability out there. So we need, for example, standards. We could use EPDs, we could use different things. We recently wrote a chapter also on how to do an LCA of a vertical farm, because if they're not done similarly, we come to totally different answers.
Thank you very much. Henry, Martin, any additional points you want to raise on that question? Only that I've had the same difficulties in getting information out of farms, getting participation out of farms. In fact, I was hoping that we'd have an answer to that question collectively by the end of this call today. That would make my life a little bit easier. All right.
I can also add that as like a researcher within the area, I think it's as it like an objective researcher in there, I would say that it's quite easy actually to get in touch with the vertical farms and help them do things. But then, yeah, making them the studies and the numbers available, that is different, and it takes quite a bit of time for a scientific article to come out as well. So we have done quite a few studies, and hopefully they're out next year. But it can take like up to a year, with the scientific process.
I think that Michael and I are probably coming at this from two different angles as well, because certification involves a form of investment from the farms and from the growers as well, which I think is a potential barrier at this point in time.
All right, thank you very much, Daniel, then Diego, then Rodan. Daniel,
Thank you.
the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment based on Diego's question and comment around, site specific. It seems to me that obviously, varied locations are going to have different impacts on what one is building or doing, right? For example, Quebec having an incredible amount of hydroelectric power and paying 5 cents a kilowatt for that power is obviously different than here in California, where I'm not off of a renewable and I'm at 12 cents a kilowatt. But the system that is being proposed to be certified can be non-site specific, meaning your categories that you're looking at are more straightforward and non-specific. And whether you are on renewables or not, what you've done is going to be sustainable or not. And yes, your energy is a piece of that. But I feel like it's not about the site. It really is about the farm. And you're going to fill out all of those pieces. And if you get certified, then you've accomplished that. And either way, you have benchmarks to measure yourself against and make improvements. A lot of our organic farmers have an issue with getting certified as organic just because of that beast, right? Is it worth my time and financial impact to get that certification, to keep that certification? As a business, that's your decision. If you want to show that you are a sustainable company and a farm, this is one of the proposed aspects to do that. Otherwise, you're trying to make a claim that's out there. Maybe you're greenwashing, maybe you're not, but it's pretty straightforward. Can we continue to do what we're doing as we're doing it indefinitely? Right? That's kind of a base sustainability concept. And by putting standards to that, we're trying to be able to have a common conversation. So to me, it doesn't seem like site specificity is really a critical factor. It's a critical factor for that farm and the purposes of that farm. But to actually be able to claim that you're sustainable is much more straightforward. Getting to those numbers may not be, but the concept's pretty straightforward, and you are in a box, right? Whether you're accomplishing that mission or you're not. Little leaks or big leaks, but that's how I see it anyway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Any reaction to Daniel's point?
Only that I agree with near everything that was said. To be honest, that's all extremely sensible. The only sort of layer I could add to that is that with any certification, you're taking these concepts, which as you say, can we continue doing what we're doing indefinitely? Taking these grand concepts and having to boil them down into something that an auditor can go and gather evidence for and check when he goes to visit a farm. And this is really the challenge at this point. And I'm only bringing this to the table because I have kind of a sustainability auditing background. So this is the challenge that we have, and I think as we see uptake or as the program grows, we'll be in a better position to refine and to make changes and to essentially tailor it and make it more appropriate to achieving that goal. And as you say, of being a guarantor or being evidence for sustainable practices.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. So let me give the floor to,
Jacob, if I may, yeah, we avoided definitely to do that. And if we avoided creating a monsters and the beast that you mentioned so that farms can apply and get the certification. And we have to bear in mind that sustainability is not a state that you can reach and say, okay, I'm sustainable. It needs to be a dynamic system. So we want to see the certification scheme as this living organism, and we will refine it as we go along. But for now, it's a pretty straightforward setting trends for the industry, and the farms can apply for it. And they will be sure that we're going to give them assurance that there will be an anonymity so that their data will not be shared. So that's another incentive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ramin. Let me give the floor to Leone, that it has been waiting for ages for. Leone, please, floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, cool. Thank you. Well, actually, it's true. I lowered my hand because actually Paul Gauthier, I would say he already covered 80% of my question, but then the discussion continued, and then I had another point I wanted to make. I was thinking, okay, I already asked in the chat and nobody answered to that. And I asked if you already have a threshold of potential cost for this certification, knowing that for the time being is not compulsory, and that, I mean, I guess that most of the vertical farm operations today already sorted out the marketing and they are selling their produce, because otherwise they wouldn't be standing up by themselves, because the cost for maintaining a vertical farm are so high that they must have already sorted out their numbers. So but then so I think that is a very important aspect. And then I started thinking that if you're looking for data, and on top of that you're asking people to pay for somebody coming and inspecting and looking into your data, of course, then that probably does not going to be smooth or fast. And what instead, if you could somehow find an agreement, like you lower the cost, and in exchange, you will accept that part of your data are coming out. That could be an option. Another way I was thinking is that I'm assuming that most of vertical farming operations are run anyway by very competent people with a high studies level. Often there are PhDs. So I'm saying that probably people in the inside or behind those operations are definitely educated and sensible to this concept. So why don't you, would it be an option to somehow to shift part of the work directly onto the vertical farm staff, yes, and so that you somehow you reduce part of your work and you involve the management of the vertical farms. I'm using the vertical farms, but actually that would apply, of course, to rooftops, any other type of similar operations. But so you would somehow have them involved, that this would probably lower the costs and increase their interest to know they're getting into something. Because at the end of the day, I think everybody would agree that having it possible to claim on the basis of a certification that the LCA, I mean the balance eventually is good. I think that would be very, very interesting. And then another comment, I think Andrea said that you wanted to avoid starting at making like this amount of CO2 per kilogram of produce, of fresh product. But I think that somehow at some point you will have to consider that as a point, because it will be so difficult and so expensive to get an assessment of how it costs in terms of the environmental cost for production everywhere. And now I wanted to mention, for example, let's talk about an African country. Let's talk about a small country that imports a lot of food. And then the alternative, it's mainly importing fresh fruit with airplanes. So how would that compare? Usually in this country, the cost of energy is also very high and it's fuel-based. So, I mean, yeah, it's a very complex scenario anyway. So thank you. And I think if you had an idea about the costing for such kind of process, that would be interesting to know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leone. Thank you for your comments and questions. Before I give the floor mainly to Henry, let me just put one more thing on your comment. The first one is that yes, the issue about providing data is an issue. The cost is an issue. But I think more than the certifier is the public sector that should chip in and make this possible. I mean, and this could be a very positive, if you want, subsidies instead of, all the maladaptive and other subsidies. So this is a very interesting point of discussion that could also be enlarged to a much higher level of discussion. Then to the issue about the country that imports most of the foods, indeed. I mean, we have hundreds of these countries, of course, not countries, but hundreds of these situations where food is mostly imported at high cost, at high environmental cost. But again, that's why you need to have, as much as possible, a clear understanding of how much it costs in environmental and social terms to produce 1 kilogram of produce. Now, once you have identified it, then you can contextualize it. But if we don't do this first step, and believe me, many of you commented, oh, we should compare products, tomatoes with, but these data are not there. When you look at the database, we just published a very interesting report on decarbonization of the agri-food sector. And believe me, we pay, like really, it was painful to get this data and information. And this, again, it's one more message from these e-dialogues that more needs to be done also at the public level to stimulate, to push, and to create the enabling conditions for this sector to develop, that is not only providing subsidies, energy, and location, but also to create the right governance mechanism and the right policy procedures to move on. Henry, over to you.
Well, first, thank you, Leone, for the great questions, and Jacopo, you've read my mind. I think you're absolutely right. I think subsidies and public sector involvement is common in every other form of agriculture that I'm aware of. Rarely are producers left on their own when it comes to certifications. That is, I'm not fully aware of all the other issues that they're involved with, but when it comes to certifications, it's extremely common to have external party involvement in that. As for the cost of the certification, currently, as we are launching the standard and rolling it out, the first few audits, we're offering a significant discount. Obviously, cost depends on the scope. So if it's a multi-site, this obviously affects the number of days that an auditor has to work. We would expect the audit as a maximum pre-discount to cost about €1,000 for an initial certification audit. This is before we enter into a discount or potential agreements as we go into trial runs with the program. So the costs is it's unavoidable because obviously Control Union is a business as well. But we are acutely aware that this is a potential limiting factor to uptake, and we're looking at how we can work with growers to find a solution that works for everyone. I think as we see how many days it takes to fully audit, and as we learn a little bit more about what this program is like in action, we'll have clear ideas of the costs. But it's very clear that the highest maximum that we would go to is about €1,000 for an initial certification audit. Just to come quickly back to your question on quantities of CO2 for sustainable or not, we absolutely are moving in that direction. And to echo what Jacopo said was that right now we just don't have the data to do that. We don't have the data to, if I say one day that X liters of CO2 is sustainable, 10 people are going to ask me, how do I know? how are you making that decision? And I don't have a very good basis for making that decision right now. So the first step is data collection before we can then come in and implement quantitative standards. Absolutely.
Thank you, Henry. Let me give the floor to Rodin that has been waiting for a long time. Please, Rodin, floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, of course. I'm currently running a vertical farm down in Norway, in a small island in Sutra on the west side of Norway. And I'm actually wanting to know, is your sustainable goals in line with the UN sustainable goals, for example, which is almost the same, and the impact that we as a CEA operators have within both in the sustainable goals that you guys are trying to achieve, and also to the UN sustainable goals that we have to follow through. We have to be a part of. Is part of the regulations right now that you have to be transparent. You have to be carbon neutral. You have to be also make a social impact in your operations. It's very good also to know that you are actually moving towards measuring the amount of CO2, the CO2 impact that CEA operators are using. And if so, if we are helping other companies, for example, to reduce their carbon emission in some way or form, do your policies actually help us to, or do you know any companies that have gone through any carbon financing using carbon credits as a form of rewarding factors in the sustainable goals? Thank you.
Henry.
Direct links to the SDGs, we don't explicitly reference them in the criteria, but our certification standard absolutely fits into several of the UN SDGs. Off the top of my head, I couldn't list them out for you right now, but I think we bear the overall kind of direction of the sustainable development. We've kept that in mind with the development of this program. There's no explicit reference to these at any point, though. I think that to build that in, we would need to be very, very careful about how we would tie these in, and we would run the risk of becoming overly prescriptive with what we require of the standard. But as to your second question, I'm not aware of any such farms.
All right, thank you, Henry. Let me give, because time is running and we have many people that have their hand raised. Say, please go ahead.
First of all, I should say thank you for everyone, and I like to engage and see this program up and running, because everybody are looking for this standard. One point that I would like to share, that everybody has a different ideas and different perspective from this standard, but somebody has a very, very high ambitious about energy and all the high impact of vertical farming. Some people usually at the beginning, they wanted to get the like a basic line to get started. And at the same time, we have like a cities and the country regulation for building, coating and zoning. So there are something others. My point is, rather than just making all these things together, and sometimes it's not achievable, so we can make different levels of the standard. So for example, if somebody wanted to start, they need to meet a minimum requirement or follow the specific standard that we asked for, and the zoning and the county are agree to give them the permit. Because in the real world, I can see the several investors put their money, build a farm, then they stop the business and they go to bankruptcy because the city didn't ready to give them the approval. So that's something that even this certificate can help all the investors and protect the investor, and also city mayors can receive some good idea and a good timeline or time frame or standard from this program, so how they can approve and or reject any applicant they wanted to start with the vertical farming. For example, I don't know if I can share my screen or not. There's some different, if you Google it, there's some different methods for the energy efficiency rating. So if I just Google energy efficiency rating, you will see the lots of the different aspects. So this is not one item. So in that certificate, or we can provide all this information. For example, carbon footprint, or energy efficiency, or even the productivity, health, and the food safety. So many different items that we discuss, and everybody has a good ideas. Sometimes it's not capable to bring everything together, but we can rate it in this different way, and we can build a very good informative label for each farm. That's, I guess, can answer all the questions. How much water? We can rate it from the 1 to 10. How much fertilizer? We can rate it to 1 to 10. How much carbon? We can rate it from 1 to 100. They can save with this standard. And the people, if they wanted to go and make it the branding, they should go to the higher levels. So they can, it's in this case, we push the growers to improve themselves. As Ramin mentioned, the standard is not one point that you can achieve and will be okay. No, we have to keep going and encourage the people to save the water, save the fertilizer, save energy, and produce more healthy food. So that's, I guess, addressed all the different people that wanted to come to this program, and we are at the other side, we are not losing the people that they're scared to come to this program because they might thinking they cannot meet the requirement, or they may not pass the standard. So I wanted to bring the more people to the program, and then they can go with some guideline and comment with this program.
Thank you, Said. Thank you very much. I think that Marti has a point to make on a couple of questions, and also to react to Said's comments, and then I'll give the floor to Gillian and Diego, and that's it. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jacob. Just to link a couple of questions or comments in the chat, I think was Kindle that mentioned that like a standard or a source of methods is the way to go. I think it was Diego that asked me personally if it was like any other LCA practitioner that the LCA for the case studies, the results would have been different. And like I just have to say that of course they will be, because I just follow ISO 14040, ISO 4004, which are the standards of ISO for LCA. But apart from that, LCA practitioners doesn't have any like further guidance to approach not only like vertical farming systems, but agriculture as a whole. So I, for example, as in our group that did this report, which shows the EF method, which is released by the European Commission, because all the countries, including the case studies, were from the European Union. But it could be the case that any other researcher that was working in exactly the same case studies just shows a different method, and the results would have like been different, definitely. And as I was showing previously, the organization of the inventory, the choice of the functional unit, the choice of like impact categories, all of these choices that the practitioner has to make. And if we have like, let's say, it could be a PCR, it could be like a standard scheme, whatever. Putting that in place, I think it's mandatory to make the studies comparable and stop having this disparity of results with the case studies.
Thank you, Marti. Let me give the floor to Gillian, then to Diego very quickly, and then we have a very important point that Maria from InFarm put in the chat, and I would like her to make it more openly in the panel. Gillian.
Hi, good afternoon. Hi.
Gillian, sorry, I muted you by mistake. Can you
okay, don't worry about it. Yes, Gillian Dobie from Grow Up Farms. I'm the impact director with a background in heavy industry and manufacturing before getting it. So delighted that there is discussion going on about standardization in this industry. In manufacturing, it is the #1 thing, and heavy industry particularly has been doing it for maybe 20, 30 years, particularly with ISO standards. So thank you very much for doing all of this hard work. My point, which I've put in the chat already, is that CEA, whilst there's lots of different types, it is in its end just another way of growing food, and putting it in a box and comparing it amongst itself doesn't necessarily give you a fair view of the sustainability of the production of, for example, lettuce or tomatoes. In Europe, CEA produces less than 1% of Europe's lettuce production. Why are we not comparing ourselves to lettuce production in general, which is indeed where all the negative impacts are for the food that people eat in Europe? So I'm just absolutely stoked that we're having this discussion, but I think we must be careful that we don't sit in our own box and compare ourselves. We need to be comparing ourselves to the production of lettuce in general, or the production of tomatoes in general. And I just wanted to hear from the panel if that's something that you have considered. Yeah, that's my point.
Thank you, Gillen. Yes, the very quick answer is absolutely yes. We are looking at comparing these across the different production modalities, because that's the big point. But again, data is a big issue. That is a big issue. And I understand from the comments from Paul, from Diego and others that farmers or companies are not willing. But let me also share like the findings of a study that I'm just uploading here in the chat, the one I was mentioning still with the EBRD. And actually the companies that have been more open and that have invested earlier on these aspects are those that then ended up more resilient, more strong, and with higher market opportunities. Now, the market is requesting this. It's not only the certifiers or the FAO or the NGOs, it's the market that wants this. Now, companies and farmers can avoid producing data, but can also take the opportunity. As I was saying before, and I agree with Paul and I agree with everybody, I don't think we disagree here, but we need to find also kind of a more public-private understanding of how this data should be made available and how farmers should be compensated. Now, the compensation, it's different here, because here we are not talking about the data that you give to Facebook or to any other IT companies. Here are data that actually need to answer the claims that you have made as companies. Now, when we look at especially at the vertical farms, in the urban environment in general, it's always sold as, you know, the cornucopia and the problem solver for everything, which is not, because it cannot be. But definitely there are plus and cons, and we need to look at these. But to look at this, we need to have the data. Diego, the floor is yours, and then I have Maria.
Right. Thank you so much. So thanks. Yeah. So the data question was like a big one because we've all been talking about it. And it's not just us, right? Anywhere you go, academia, anything you try to do, data will always be your problem. Now, going back to the actual LCA stuff. Yeah, Martin mentioned that. And I know, of course, the methodologies they use because I'm at the same institute where he studied. And I know that the way they do LCAs there comes from like the academic rigor. And if I'm being honest, I personally think that it comes from a good place trying to protect the environment. The issue I've always had with this and the curiosity of why I'm so invested in it is that what happens if, for example, somebody comes up with like a rival standard? And that's just my curiosity. So say you guys develop a very good one, comprehensive, really protects the environment, and you consider social and economic dimensions, which would be like, that would be what we want, right? But what if somebody comes up with one that is like less stringent? And then companies that, depending on how much market power they have, they just say, you know what, this is the one we want to use, right? So just get some thoughts on that. I know I doubt there will be concrete. Well, no, please let me know your thoughts.
Well, this is a great question, and this is true for all certifications. And in fact, there's studies have shown that greater market penetration is achieved with weaker standards. It's a huge trade-off in the robustness of a standard. In itself intrinsically limits access to a wider audience because it's so tough to reach. But then in that sense, it loses also a degree of recognition, whereas a lower standard might be accessible by more. And so as a result, be more understood and be better known. At the current moment in time, there are other standards out there. There's one on quality in the United States that I'm aware of. And there's also a kind of jack of all trades standard available in Singapore. None cover the exact same scope as we do. And we identified that the niche, and this in a way answers Gillen's question as well, that while there are certification programs out there available for lots of, to denote the sustainability of conventional agriculture and things of that nature, there aren't, or there didn't at the time that we created, those didn't exist for vertical farming. And so while I'm absolutely in favor of cross-industry comparison of performance against all of these impact categories, one of the things we really try to achieve is to set good practices apart within the field itself also, because within the field there'll be higher performing and less well performing with regard to sustainability farms. And so what we sought out to do is also to highlight these good practices within the field. Now, this does result in intra CEA comparison, but creating a standard which has the scope for both conventional agriculture and controlled environment agriculture is difficult because there's not always the same impact categories to consider. I think the big ones, energy, CO2, nutrient, water, yes, you could absolutely go across industry. That hasn't been done yet as far as I'm aware. And that's not what we set out to achieve with our own.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you very much. Before I give the floor to Maria, let me clarify, because I was not sure I fully understood Diego's comment, but the study that Martí and Michael did, it's not related to the standard. It's not to provide the evidence for the standard or not. We have today here Henry and Ramin, because they are the only one that are really advanced with the standard for the specific part of this sector. And also the one that accepted to be here and be open about the methodology. So our work is not related to the control union or to ADF. Before giving the floor to other colleagues, Maria, if you could take the floor and point out what your point, because I think is excellent and need to be more discussed more, right?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a really interesting discussion. Hi, Maria. I'm the sustainability manager of InFarm. For us specifically, setting science-based target has been a really exciting and long journey too. We are collaborating with a wide range of vertical farms at the moment in a forum that we call CEO Policy Forum. We specifically guide them on certain sustainability topics around assessing your footprint and how to go along with the science-based targets. And something that we found is that often organizations really want to comply with standards. Often organizations want to really do the best, but sometimes it's not really clear how to achieve certain metrics or how to arrive at certain metrics. So when I look at the standard and I see that you look at, I don't know, kilograms of products used, or you look at the liters of waters used, or if you look at energy, etc., the question that we often get is, yeah, but how do we measure this? How do we measure this consistently? What are the processes that we need to implement internally to make sure that those are also measured in the right way? And yeah, just like more really questions around the process of arriving at these metrics. So my question was, apart from the metrics, will you also provide guidance on how to achieve measuring all those?
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. Again, another possible element for public-private collaboration on that. Henry, please. Very quickly, because we have 1 minute, and you have 1 minute.
Yeah, unable to answer in 2 minutes. Thank you so much for the question. I would love to discuss this with you further. If you have the time, I left my email in the chat. If you want to get in touch or maybe send me your email, that'd be great. One thing I will leave with is we did not want to be prescriptive about how farms operate. And that includes, to a degree, data collection. We don't want to tell a grower, you must grow your tomatoes this way. That's not the approach that we took to sustainability, because we wanted to honor and respect the plasticity within the field of controlled environment agriculture. However, not having a technical background, I'm not able to answer your question right now. And I would really love to learn more from you and hear more from you about that.
Excellent. Thank you, Henry. Michael, Marty, please, like a 30 seconds final thoughts before I close. We are already done with the time. Please, Michael.
Nothing else to say, but except thank you very much for the nice discussions. I mean, I'm happy to answer questions also outside of this forum. It's really interesting, and we see that there's a ton of things to talk about, and even this hour is not enough. So I would also have liked to have more than 5 minutes in my presentation today. Thank you.
We would have not time for the discussion.
Yeah.
Martin.
Yeah, same words that Michael. I mean, the fact that the results are like really different from one practitioner to the other, from one method to the other, is really challenging. And I think this type of like dialogues where we exchange this information is one of the ways to go.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Ramin?
Thanks a lot for the invite. And I do encourage everyone to reach out to us, connect with me on LinkedIn, and we do need these LCA studies, so do as many of them as you can. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Well, what to say? I think it was an incredible discussion as usual, full of questions. Some of the questions, unfortunately, we did not have the time to answer, but feel free to reach us via email, and we will try to provide you with all the possible data and answer. This is our job. Let me wrap up. 3 main points that I see, and actually let's say 5. The first one is data, the second one is data, the third one is data. The fourth one is governance, and the fifth one is let's stop working in compartments. I think the last point that Maria made, it's probably the best point summarizing the entire discussion. If we keep working in silos and thinking that we have the best technology, the best production, the best, but we don't prove anything, well, then we just remain isolated and the market will not trust us. I agree with Paul, standardized data, 100%. Now, these also call for more, let's say, out of the private sector engagement, because the role of the public is not just to give money or distribute benefits, but it's also to create the enabling conditions. And the first step is to create a governance that will make possible companies to really provide data, because they will be competing on the same floor and on the same ground of evaluation. Of course, being a voluntary market, nobody can force this. And again, that's why we call for more engagement of the private sector, with not only with the certifiers, but with the governments, with whoever is involved in that, because only through that we will be able to have a very transparent and strong standard that is not appealable because of its weak, and therefore it penetrates better the market. One last point. IRIDE told us rightfully that this is the last technical e-dialogue. So we have closed all the points and big question marks that we have raised a year ago when we more or less, yes, a year ago, and exactly a year ago when we started this process. Many thanks to all of you. Early 2023, we will have the last e-dialogue that will be a big wrap up of all the points that we discussed so far, where we will also be very glad to present you all the final elements and data from our work. So it will be the prime to present you all and to the public our work. That of course will include all the points that we have discussed in the past 9 dialogues, including life cycle assessment, and where you will be able to meet and discuss with all those that presented and participated. As usual, it will be online. We all hate Zoom very much now, but I think it's still the best way to gather more than 1,000 people across 95 countries. Very happy because we have 5 continents represented. I'm sure we also have somebody from Antarctica, but they don't show up, but that's okay. So a big thank to everybody, and as usual, a big thank to all those that make these e-dialogues possible, include Tamara, Giuseppina, and the whole team that is not visible here, and of course to colleagues at the EBRD that made all of this possible. Thank you again, everybody. I look forward to seeing you in 2023, and let's keep this discussion vivid and engaged to the topic. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody. Have a nice end of the day and a great weekend and a great
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.